Monitoring and audits. My name is Meredith Fitz-Gerald, and I'm the Clinical Research Manager with the Clinical Research Support Program. So today's learning objectives are to define monitoring and the regulations that govern monitoring, describe different types of monitoring visits, describe the site's responsibility during the monitoring visit, and review FDA audits and the site's responsibilities. So what is monitoring and why is it so important? Monitoring is the act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with the protocol, standard operating procedures, good clinical practice, and applicable regulatory requirements. So the FDA and ICH guidelines on monitoring are these. And what the most important thing that needs to be done is to make sure that the subject's rights are protected, and to ensure that the study data is recorded on case report forms, that it is complete and accurate and verifiable from the source documents. It's also important to validate that the study is being conducted according to GCP and the protocol is being adhered to. So qualifications of a monitor. Usually they're appointed by the sponsor. They are appropriately trained and should have scientific and clinical knowledge to monitor their trial. They should be familiar with the investigational product, the protocol, the informed consent, and any other written information provided to the subjects. A lot of times we have monitors that don't have clinical background, so that becomes a little bit challenging, but most of the time they've been very well trained on the protocol. So the responsibilities of a monitor. They're the line of communication between the sponsor and the investigator. They verify that the investigator's qualification, that the investigator is qualified to perform the research, and that they will adhere to the protocol. They look for they look at the written informed consent forms and make sure that they were attained before the subject participates in the trial. And this is very, very important because if an FDA auditor comes in, that's one of the first things that they're going to want to make sure happened. They want to see written documentation that nothing was performed before the patient gave written consent. They also want to make sure that the informed consent, all the questions have been answered by the patients, and that the patients have been given copies of the informed consent form. They want to ensure that the site is trained on the protocol, and this is very important. We were just recently at a meeting not too long ago, and an FDA auditor said that they really look at the training. They look at the training of the PI, and they look at the training of the staff. So there needs to be a documentation that all the staff was trained and that they have the educational requirements that's needed to perform the study. They want to verify that the source documents are accurate and complete and up to date. And they want to make sure that they can verify the case report forms and the source documents and make sure that they match. They want to make sure that the investigational product is stored in the proper conditions and that the supplies, the IP supplies, are sufficient. They want to make sure that when you receive the supplies that they have been documented in the regulatory documents and that everything was received in good order. They want to make sure that when you assign it to the patients that you've recorded it out properly on your regulatory documents. They want to make sure, and this is a huge one, that corrections are made with one line, initial and dated. And let me repeat that. You don't want to scribble out, you don't want to black out, you don't want to use white out or anything like that. Just a simple line through the era, initial it and date it. They really look and frown upon any kind of scribbling out or blacking out or whiting out, anything like that. So that's a huge one. They want to determine that AEs are reported in a timely manner and that they go by the protocol in your GCPs and your SOPs in your office. They want to determine whether the investigator is maintaining regulatory documents accurately. They want to ensure that any kind of deviations are reported and appropriate actions in order to prevent the reoccurrence of the action is documented. And this is a real important one. We all make mistakes, but it's really important as a site to take the time and sit down with the whole research team, come up, if you've had made a mistake and haven't followed the protocol like you should, that you've re-educated everybody and documented the re-education and that you've made the changes so it wouldn't occur, the mistake wouldn't occur again. Also have the site responsibilities. You really need to make sure you have a quality assurance or quality control plan and make sure that this process is in place. A lot of times what we do in our office is we may, before a monitor comes, pick 5 to 10 charts and really thoroughly go through those charts just like a monitor would do. We have a checklist that we go by and make sure our regulatory documents are all in order. It saves you, it may cost you a little bit of time, but in the end it actually saves you time. And you want to assist the monitor in scheduling the visit, provide directions to the site and parking information, and maybe even a hotel to stay in, suggestions near what hotels are near campus or near your site. You want to make sure that you schedule the visits to the pharmacy and the research lab as necessary, and pre-plan ahead and let the pharmacy and the lab know that your monitor is coming. You want to ensure that you have the space for all the monitoring activities to occur. And make sure, this is a new one that just came to our attention, make sure you check the monitor's credentials upon arrival. Anytime you have an FDA auditor, you always check their credentials, and a monitor is no different. So you really need to make sure that your monitor is who they say they are. So maybe ask to verify their employment badge or a driver's license. You may have talked to them on the phone, but just make sure that the name on the monitoring letter matches to the name of the person that's there. You need to dedicate time to work with the monitor each day. This can save you a lot of time in the long run, because if you're there with the monitor, you can answer queries or maybe even prevent queries from being issued. And that saves you time in that you don't have to go back and try to answer queries and not have that monitor there to help answer some questions or explain where the query came from. And consider the need for staff retraining and additional training. If you see something that's consistently happening, that you need to take the time to re-educate and sit down and try to prevent things from happening that seem to be repetitive. And prepare for the next visit. When the monitor issues their letter, really take time to sit down and address those things so the next time the monitor comes, those things are already done and completed, and she can start fresh with the new visit. So there are many types of monitoring visits. There's the pre-site questionnaire, the site assessment visit, the study initiation visit, the interim monitoring visit, the sponsor-directed ad hoc visits, site management calls, and specialized lab audits, and the closeout visit. So the pre-site visit is like your job application. This is the site selection visit. They review the staff research and experience. A lot of times they'll look for the type of training that your staff has. Do you have the IATA training that you need to ship labs? Do you have the GCP training, the ICH training, IRB training, just the basic training? Does all your staff have the things that they're looking for the study? They also want to know about your IRB process and the meeting and the turnaround times. They want to know if you can hit your study accrual goals, because it's real important to be able to hit those goals or enroll the patients that they're looking for in the study. And they want to inquire if the site has been audited, and if they have been audited, what were the findings of the audit. Sometimes the site assessment visit is combined with the pre-site visit. Sometimes they do those together. So the site assessment visit, the purpose is to see that the resources, that you actually have the office space, the experience, the population. In the lab, they want to make sure that you have a certified centrifuge or any of the equipment that you say you need, freezers. They want to see freezing logs. A lot of times if you have a shadow source docs, that helps, that you can show them that this is how you organize your clinical trials and this is what you do. They also, and we kind of touched base on this, the site needs to make sure the training and that you can support the place to have the monitoring visits. So the study initiation visit. Prior to the official start of the study, usually this occurs, and what they do is they send someone out and make sure that you have all the supplies that you need to start that trial. They also review your responsibilities as what you're supposed to do in the trial, and they ensure that the opportunity to establish the groundwork for a successful trial is there. A lot of times at this study initiation visit, I use this visit to ask my monitors, what are sites doing, or successful sites doing to recruit patients? If they have source already designed, I may ask to see their source, or even see if they can email it so I can cut and paste and make it into our source and add, the UAB language or the UAB things that we need to add to the source document. So it's kind of like I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm using what's already been established, and I'm adding to it. A lot of times, too, I will ask what other sites' deviations that they've had. So you want to, so I can avoid making the same deviations, and I can design my source so that the same mistakes aren't made. Because sometimes if you have a protocol that's not really clearly written, it's really easy to make a mistake. And if you've already had a site that's been down that road, and your monitor can help you say, okay, don't do this again, or this is what's happening at our other sites, it makes life easier for you. So the interim monitoring visits. And this is to verify that everything remains acceptable for the study, to verify that you have IRB approval on all protocol amendments, that you're using the most recently approved consent form, that you've determined that you're actually enrolling the right patient population, and that you're adhering to the patient eligibility. And this is another thing that monitors and FDA auditors really look for. When you have inclusion and exclusion criteria, you want to make sure that the patient really meets that criteria. And the PI is the actual person that should sign off on this. So when I design source, I make sure that my inclusion and exclusion criteria has a place for my PI to sign off on the day of randomization. And if they have to come back, if you have like a pre-study visit and then an actual randomization date, make sure that you have two places so that monitor knows that that patient met the criteria on the date of randomization and that you're adhering by the protocol. They want to make sure that your CRS and your source documents match each other. If you have a protocol that says that you need to take blood pressures every 5 minutes times 3 times, then you need to make sure your source is designed that it has times for that you make sure you're taking it 5 minutes apart, and that monitor can verify that. Also, fasting is another thing that we don't think about, but we need to record the last time the patient ate. If it says in the protocol that they're to be fasting 8 hours, how does that monitor know that that patient really fasted for 8 hours? So it's really important to make sure you're documenting and that your source documents match your CRS. And they need to determine if there's been any falsification of data. They want to perform drug accountability and make sure that the patient is being compliant and taking study drug, or they're following the directions with their device or whatever the IP is. They want to review specimen storage and handling. If a lab manual says that you're supposed to process something, let it clot for 30 minutes and then process it and immediately get it to the freezer, there needs to be a paper trail showing that that's actually what happened, because if you don't do it this way, it really can affect the results of the labs. And they want to make sure that AEs and SAEs have been recorded and reviewed by your PI. And they want to make sure that you've reviewed any, or they want to review any protocol deviations. So The task to be performed during the interim monitoring visits is that they also review the regulatory binder and make sure that all logs are up to date, and your temperature logs with your IP and with your labs. If you're using a freezer, that freezer has stayed within the boundaries of the temperatures that they specified. They want to make sure that issues that were identified at previous visits have been addressed, and there's been teaching and follow-up and a plan for those things not to happen again. And a lot of times the monitors will take the time to retrain you and your staff, and they'll want to have a debriefing with your PI and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So during the monitoring visit, the monitor will need access to a telephone and a computer and a space to work. They'll need the subject's records and source documents and medical records and research records. They'll need the case report forms. In the latter times, those are electronic. And they'll need regulatory binders with all the information included. Like if there's several binders, they'll need all the binders. And they'll need to make sure your logs, like I said, are up to date, and that you've recorded the IP, the drug receipt, and that it has been verified with the sponsor to make sure everybody's counts are agreeable. So ad hoc visits. A lot of times these occur for calls or out of concern for the sponsor. They want to make sure that they can review the essential documents, especially the subject records and drug accountability. And they want to make sure that lab specimens are properly stored and processed the way that they have set out for it to be done. They also want to train sites and retrain sites and retrain. A lot of times if you have a lot of coordinator turnover, they'll come out and they'll help train the new coordinators and help clean up what was done before, and then you can move forward. So the site management call. This is an interim monitoring visit, and a lot of times they do this to review enrollment and screening and review any regulatory issues. I really like these phone calls. A lot of sites do it monthly or every 2 weeks, bi-weekly, and a lot of times you can get, if you've hit that stop sign where you can't recruit patients, you can use these calls with your monitor and with other sites a lot of times to see what they're doing, and it helps kind of give you a roundtable approach where you can brainstorm and maybe use what they're doing at your site. You may have to modify it to make it useful at your site, but it can give you ideas to help you overcome that stop sign where you can keep on going and enrolling. It also helps make sure that you have turned in all the regulatory documents that they need, and your monitor can tell you exactly what they need. Answering queries. This is an excellent time. A lot of times I'll ask them, I'm not sure what this query means. Can you help me out here and explain where? Because a lot of times they're not even monitor driven. They may be data driven, and so a lot of times they have to stop and look at it and kind of figure out what they're asking. They also review and make sure that you have lab supplies and that you don't need to reorder or some of the things that you might need. It gives you time, or it kind of jogs your memory. Hey, I need to check and make sure my lab kits aren't expiring. They also review subject safety and make sure that you're not seeing, a lot of times I'll ask them on the phone calls, are you seeing any kind of repetitive AEs or SAEs and stuff like that? And any other concerns that you may have as a site, this is a good opportunity to talk with your monitor and see if there's any other concerns and see if you can get those concerns resolved. So specialized lab audits. So the purpose of this is to make sure that the samples are collected by the protocol, that who collects them, what time they're collected, how they're transferred. If it says to transfer them in a cup of ice or immediately after drawing it to put in a cup of ice, then you really need to do that and make sure that you have thought through the whole process before you actually get to the lab manual and go, oh, I was supposed to put this on ice and it wasn't on ice. And make sure it's documented, because the monitor can't see what was done weeks ago. So the documentation or having good source docs allows the monitor to know that it's collected the way that the lab manual and the protocol has set up for it to be. And do you have any SOPs? And make sure that the SOPs are in place for maintaining your equipment, making sure that a centrifuge is calibrated correctly and that your freezers are actually really staying in the temperatures that they're supposed to. And we kind of went over the part where the patient fasted in the time of the last meal. That's something that when I first started research I took for granted, but now I really make sure that if it says that they're fasting, that I record the last time they had anything to eat or drink. And I make sure that it's within those hours. And then the debriefing is with the PI and the coordinator, and they should both be present, and they should talk about any concerns that the monitor would have or trends that the monitor is seeing at her visits. And really make sure that you have a plan, a resolution, and really re-educate your staff, and that, you know, if deviations occur, that you have a plan in place that it's not going to happen again. And then identify any follow-up issues from that current visit and for future visits. So you want to make sure that anything that the monitor really points out is addressed. Sometimes monitors, especially the ones that don't have clinical backgrounds, I had one, I worked in a cardiology area, and this patient had diabetes and had high blood sugars pretty much along, but during the clinical trial, we really did a lot of patient education, referred them back to their PCP and their endocrinologist. We're working on getting their medications regulated so to better control the blood sugars. And actually her blood sugars, or this patient's blood sugars, had improved, but the monitor wanted us to record it as an AE. And the PI was like, absolutely not. Actually, if you look at the trend, her blood sugars, or his blood sugars, are much better. So sometimes it's you have to kind of sit down and talk to the monitors, and a lot of times we'll refer back to my PI because the PI makes the ultimate decision. So sometimes you have to kind of sit down and table things until your PI is present. But try to, you know, while the PI is there, resolve all identified issues prior to the monitor leaving. And then we touched base a little bit on this, just making sure that anything in the monitoring report is addressed, and that if there's a follow-up action required, that making sure that it's resolved prior to the next visit. So you finally made it to the finish line, and at the end of the study, for the closeout visit, you want to make sure all queries have been resolved, and that you've sent in that final report to the IRB, and that you've sent back the supplies to the sponsor if they've requested them, and that all your logs are in your regulatory binders are complete and up to date. You want to make sure your delegation log has, you know, the start date and the end date, and make sure that you've been paid for all your hard work. So what makes the FDA suspicious? If you're a high enroller and the results are too good to be true, and there may be, you know, complaints from the subjects or sponsor or ex-employees, those are all things that make them suspicious. Also, attempts to delay the inspection, putting off the inspector, that can be a red flag to them. Attempts to limit documents, like source documents and CRFs to the investigator. And if the PI doesn't show up for the audit, that's a huge red flag. Making sure that the consent forms weren't all signed by the same person with the same ink pen and the same writing. I mean, that's a big red flag. And making sure that notations are in chronological order. If they're all out of order and it's all messy and a lot of strike-throughs and white out and all that kind of stuff, that's a huge red flag. So, I mean, altering or omitting data is another thing that makes the FDA suspicious. So, during an FDA audit, if falsification is seen, it just places everybody at risk, and it really impacts the validity of the whole trial. We've had too many drugs that have been recalled, so we really need to make sure that we are accurately recording what happens. And you've done all this hard work, and then it's just jeopardized by somebody omitting or falsifying the data. And that's really not what we want to do. We want to give good data that is accurate and verifiable. So investigator disqualifications have resulted from repeated or deliverable submission of false data, failure to obtain RB approval, failure to obtain informed consent or not using the most current informed consent, failure to sign the FDA Form 1572, failure to follow the protocol, inadequate record keeping, inappropriate study drug administration, and refusing the FDA inspection. So your responsibility as a site before the inspection is to be prepared, to notify all parties. That means the IRB, that's your sponsor. If you have somebody on campus that can come help audit your records, I mean, you have to get permission. You can't just let anybody come look at your records. But anybody that's already gone through an FDA audit, use them as a resource and really question what happened and what to expect and be prepared so when they're there. And ask to see the FDA investigator's credential upon their arrival. So during this inspection, you want to cooperate with the investigator. You want to meet daily with them and, if possible, resolve or address any findings. And after the inspection, you want to discuss what those deviations were during the exit interview. You want to implement SOPs that address deficiencies and deviations. And you want to provide a written response to the FDA on the Form 483. And you want to discuss any of the findings at your site or even your department and educate everybody. The thing that this FDA auditor said to us is they really look at education. So making sure it's documented accurately in your reg docs is really, really critical and important. And so the last slide is that this investigator really took monitoring to heart and wore a camera. So I wish you tons of luck, and thank you again.